My name is Dr. Lauren Ellis, and I was told not to come home for Christmas. The call came 3 days before Christmas. I had just gotten home from a long shift at the hospital, already exhausted but still smiling as I looked at the packed bag by my door. I had bought gifts for everyone, including the rosemary stuffing ingredients they always asked for, though they never remembered I was the one who made it. I even bought a new forest green sweater, soft, simple, festive but not trying too hard. Just enough. When my phone buzzed and I saw my younger brother Blake's name, I assumed he was calling to ask if I could bring extra napkins or coordinate carpooling like every other year. But instead, he said, "Hey, so listen, Savannah's coming to Christmas, right? She's really into energy, like how a room feels. And with your work, sometimes it can feel kind of heavy. I think, for her sake, it might be better if you sat this one out. It's nothing personal." I didn't argue. I didn't ask what he meant by heavy. He didn't say, "You're a dedicated geriatric doctor who helps people die with dignity." No, just heavy, like a wet towel on his Instagram aesthetic. An hour later, my mom called. Her voice was soft like a lullaby hiding a grenade. "Honey, we're just trying to make this easy for everyone. You know how sensitive she is. If you come, it could cause confusion. Honestly, we might not answer the door." That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just not invited, I was unwanted. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said okay, hung up, and opened my banking app. Mortgage payment canceled. Car loan top-up frozen. Emergency maintenance fund locked. I stopped being their silent backbone. No social media post, no message, just silence. And for the first time, that silence was mine. I used to think the way my family treated me was normal. That maybe I was just too serious, too focused, too much. Growing up, I was the oldest. The trial run, as my dad once joked at a barbecue, right before handing Blake the bigger slice of cake. Blake, the golden boy. Creative, charming, the miracle baby born after years of trying. I was just first. When Blake was 6, he drew all over the living room wall with a permanent marker. My parents called it expressive. When I broke a bowl while helping set the table, I was careless and told I needed to pay more attention. Blake came home from school with a participation ribbon once it stayed on the fridge for a week. I brought home straight A's and they said that's nice, then slid the report card into a drawer. Once I even left my perfect GP a letter on the kitchen counter, hoping someone would ask. No one did. When I got accepted to medical school first round, no gap year, no second tries, I printed the acceptance letter and showed it to my mom. She said, "Wow, that's intense. You'll have to be careful not to burn out." When Blake dropped out of college for the 3rd time to pursue creative direction, they threw him a re-entry party. Balloons, cake. A photo of him with a paintbrush now sits framed in the hallway, like he cured cancer. They always said he was artsy, that he felt things deeply. I once found my sketchbook in the recycling bin, under grocery store flyers. When I asked, they said they thought it was scrap paper. But I kept going. I worked hard. I graduated early. I got licensed. I started treating elderly patients, people who had been dismissed, forgotten, left to decline alone. I gave them my time, my energy, my whole heart. At home, I gave just as quietly, fixed their plumbing, paid off a lingering home repair bill without being asked, lent Blake money when his freelance gig fell through, never asked for it back, never even mentioned it. But none of that mattered. Because in my family's eyes, Blake was the star, and I, despite everything, was just the one who always showed up on time and didn't complain. Until I didn't. There's a strange kind of pain in being the person everyone relies on, but no one really sees. That was me, the fixer, the helper, the one who quietly covered the cost of a new water heater when theirs broke down in February, the one who spotted the overdraft on my parents' account and transferred money before they even noticed, the one who booked Blake's flight home for Thanksgiving last year when he said he was a little strapped after buying new camera equipment. And I never said no, not once. Not when my mom needed copays for her physical therapy. Not when Blake called me from the side of the road because his car battery had died again. I bought him a new one that week. I was useful, and I thought that meant I was valued. But I started noticing the pattern. The way my contributions were invisible until they stopped. The way they forgot who had helped but remembered who had made things uncomfortable. When I was there, I was too quiet, too serious, too intense. When I wasn't there, things were lighter, easier, more fun. Still, I kept helping. Out of love, I told myself. Out of obligation, maybe? Or maybe just out of habit. But that night, after they told me not to come to Christmas, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage, it was realization. I opened my bank app and paused each recurring transfer. The $800 monthly top-up to their mortgage. Gone. The rainy day account I kept for family emergencies. Locked. The $1,200 Blake still owed me. I knew it would never come back, but I wouldn't let another cent go his way. They wouldn't feel it right away. That's the thing about being silently useful. It's only when the support disappears that people realize it was there at all. I didn't announce my withdrawal. I didn't post a passive-aggressive quote online. I didn't even tell my friends. I just let the silent sun settle in. And for the first time, it felt like peace. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone in my apartment with a mug of hot tea and a blanket that still smelled faintly like rosemary and fabric softener. I didn't open the gifts I had wrapped. I didn't light the tree. I didn't cry, either. I just sat still. There was a strange power in not showing up where I wasn't wanted. But the day after Christmas, my phone buzzed, not once, 3 times. My mother, ignored. Then a text, "Can you answer? You've done enough damage already." My stomach dropped. Then a new call, this time from Aunt Claire, my dad's sister. The only one in the family who still sent birthday cards with little notes in them. I answered. "What happened yesterday?" she asked softly. "They're saying you ruined Christmas, but you weren't even there." I blinked. I ruined it? She hesitated. "Something happened with Blake's girlfriend, Savannah. She left early. There was yelling. Then your name came up." That was all she knew, but it was enough. Later that evening, Aunt Claire called again. She had pieced together more. Apparently, Savannah had seen a photo of me in their living room. Just an old snapshot, probably from a birthday years ago, and she recognized me. "You saved my grandmother," she had said. "You're Dr. Lauren Ellis." The room, Claire said, went completely still. What followed wasn't clear, only that Savannah asked if I was the sister they talked about, and whatever she heard next made her quietly gather her things and leave. I didn't need the details, I could imagine it all too well. They probably joked about me, as they always did, that I lived in hospitals, that I made things too serious, how I was hard to love. Maybe they even repeated that awful line Blake once said: "Lauren is basically death in a pantsuit." It wasn't new. But this time, someone else had been listening. Someone who didn't grow up believing that cruelty was just how family speaks. Someone who remembered the doctor who stayed by her grandmother's side when every other physician had given up. Someone who saw me without being told how to see me first. That's how I ruined Christmas. By not being there to maintain the illusion. By not showing up to smile politely while they carved me into a cautionary tale. By being remembered, unexpectedly, for the good I had done for someone who wasn't them. 2 days passed before I got another call. This time, it was from my mother. She didn't say hello. She just launched in, her voice already tense. "I don't know what you said to her, but now your brother is a mess. Savannah blocked his number. She won't speak to him. And she posted something online about being treated like garbage by the family of a woman she admires." There was the sound of glass clinking in the background. Maybe she was pacing in the kitchen, maybe pouring herself a crisis glass of wine. Probably both. "She tagged your photo," she added sharply, like I'd committed a crime. I didn't say anything. I let her talk. Eventually, she reached the point. "We need you to speak to her. Just clarify that there was no bad intention, that she misunderstood." Right, because I was the family's PR department now. Damage control for the same people who had uninvited me from the dinner table. "She's ruining your brother's future," my mom said, quieter now. "His name is being dragged in those art circles she's part of. You know all that stuff in New York. He's being blacklisted." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it was. They had spent decades trying to make me invisible, and now the consequences of that invisibility were finally landing somewhere they cared about their image. I didn't respond. I just said, "I'll think about it." I didn't think about it. Instead, I opened Savannah's post. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even dramatic. It was just honest. She wrote about the doctor who had saved her grandmother, about walking into a family celebration hoping for warmth and instead hearing people joke about that same woman. She wrote how shocked she was that someone so kind and impactful could be so ridiculed by her own family. She didn't use names. She didn't have to. One line stood out. Some people hide cruelty behind polite smiles and holiday lights. But the moment I saw that photo, I remembered what real kindness looks like, and it wasn't anyone sitting at that table. It went viral in her circles. People were sharing it, commenting, tagging others. And for the first time, none of those voices were calling me difficult or heavy. They were saying, I mattered. That same night, just before I went to bed, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. Not from my mother, not from Blake, not even from my father, who only ever calls when he needs help resetting his email password. It was from Savannah. Her voice was quieter than I remembered from the one video Blake had sent weeks ago, less airy, less polished. More real. Hi, I'm so sorry to reach out like this. I got your number from your aunt, I hope that's okay. I needed to say something. There was a pause, a long one. I didn't know, she said. I didn't really know who you were, but I recognized your photo. You treated my grandmother, Alma, years ago. She still talks about you. She says you changed everything. You didn't give up on her when others did. You were kind. You were present. You made her feel like she mattered. Another pause. Her voice cracked slightly this time. I'm sorry about what happened and what was said about you. I had no idea. I couldn't sit there and pretend. So I left. That was it. I listened to it twice, then again. And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in years someone saw me, truly saw me, not through the filter of family expectations or decades of dismissal, not through the lens of too serious or too intense, not as a shadow standing behind the golden child, just as me. Savannah didn't ask for anything. She didn't suggest we reconnect or meet up for coffee. She didn't try to fix what she hadn't broken. She simply acknowledged the truth. And somehow, that did more to heal me than 1,000 empty apologies from my own family ever could. 3 days later, a small package arrived in the mail. It was a letter handwritten, on thick paper. Ink smudged slightly in the corners. Inside, Savannah wrote more about her grandmother. How she still did yoga twice a week. Still walked to the farmer's market. Still told the story of the young doctor who looked her in the eye and said, "You're not done yet." She thanked me not just for saving a life, but for showing her what real strength looked like. I framed the letter, hung it beside my desk, the same desk where I finished patient notes every evening. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Not to them, not to anyone. Just when I thought the dust had finally settled, my inbox lit up. Subject line, "Let's reset things." It was an email, signed by all three of them, my mother, my father, and Blake, a united front, as if they were submitting a group project. The tone was exactly what I expected from people who believed apologies were a form of negotiation. They didn't say sorry, not directly. So instead, they acknowledged that emotions had run high and that they regretted how things may have been perceived, which in plain English translates to, we still think we're right but we're afraid of the consequences. They suggested a family brunch, neutral territory, open-hearted discussion they called it, and then buried in the fourth paragraph they mentioned it. They'd really appreciate it if I reached out to Savannah and asked her to take down her post. There it was, the real reason for the sudden olive branch. Brunch wasn't a gesture of healing. It was a bargaining chip. An attempt to restore Blake's reputation in the art circles Savannah moved in. To clean up the mess they'd made, using me as the mop. I didn't respond. The next morning, the escalation began. My father called one of my hospital administrators, someone he'd met once at a charity event, and told him I had been acting emotionally unstable lately. Said he was concerned for my well-being. Yes, he tried to gaslight my workplace, to discredit me. Thankfully, the administrator called me right away, apologized, told me I had nothing to worry about. So that bridge burned? Then came the group text to extended family. Carefully crafted half-truths. No mention of me being excluded. No mention of the comments made behind my back. Just a whole lot of she's tearing the family apart and we're so worried about her mental state. 2 cousins I hadn't heard from in years reached out. One offered me a yoga retreat voucher just in case you're going through something. Finally, the last move, the most desperate one. A visit. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I heard the knock. I peeked through the peephole. There they were. My parents, Blake, I opened the door, leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "We just want to talk," my mom said gently. I didn't move. Because by then, I finally understood something. They weren't here for me. They were here for the version of me that had always cleaned up their messes. And that version no longer lived here. They stood there for a while, waiting, hoping, maybe, that I would fold like I used to, that I'd invite them in, that I'd make it easy again. But I didn't. After a few moments of silence, I said, "No." Just that, no explanations, no anger, no performance. I closed the door. And I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat at my desk, and looked at the letter from Savannah, framed in a soft wooden border. It reminded me that the most meaningful recognition often comes from people who have nothing to gain, who simply see you because they've been paying attention. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn the love of a family that only ever measured me against a version of themselves they wanted to believe in, the golden child, the artist, the one who made them look good. But I wasn't created to make them feel comfortable. I was born to heal, to hold hands with people on the edge of goodbye, to listen when others turn away, and in doing that, I had made a difference, a real one. I didn't save lives for praise. I didn't cancel payments for revenge. I didn't walk away to prove a point. I walked away because I finally saw the truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's power in silence, in choosing not to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. There's strength in setting boundaries and keeping them, in knowing that your worth doesn't need a family consensus to be real. As I filed my patient notes for the night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. So, to anyone out there who's been made to feel like they're too much, too serious, too inconvenient, let me tell you this. You are not too much. You are not the problem. And you never needed to shrink to fit into someone else's story. Write your own. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you most, please take a moment to like, share, or comment. Because sometimes the quietest stories carry the loudest truths. And sometimes not showing up is the most powerful thing you can do.
The operating room was colder than I had ever imagined. I was lying on the narrow table, the bright surgical lights making me squint, the steady beeping of the heart monitor reminding me that time was running out. A clipboard with my signature sat on a tray near the nurse. I had agreed to give my kidney to my oldest son Caleb, because everyone told me I was his only chance. Through the glass window stood my daughter-in-law, Aubrey, her arms folded tightly, her eyes fixed on me with a sharpness that cut deeper than any scalpel. Next to her were her parents, Victor and Elaine, nodding as if this moment was already theirs to claim. Dr. Aaron Whitfield, the surgeon, gave a calm nod to his team. The anesthesia syringe gleamed. Everything was set. Just as the nurse stepped forward, the door burst open. The hinges screeched, and every head in the room turned. A gust of hallway air rushed in, rattling the trays of instruments. My 9-year-old grandson, Theo, stumbled inside. His sneakers were muddy, his school shirt wrinkled, his chest heaving as though he had run through the entire hospital to get here. Clutched in his small hand was an old cell phone with a cracked screen. "Grandma," Theo shouted, his trembling voice echoing in the frozen room. "I need to tell the truth about why Dad really needs your kidney." The room fell into silence so complete that even the monitor's beeps sounded deafening. A doctor dropped a pair of forceps that clattered against the floor. Aubrey slammed her palms against the glass. "Do not listen to him," she screamed. But Theo did not look at her. He looked straight at me, eyes filled with fear and determination, as if the weight of our family's truth rested on his small shoulders. My name is Lorraine Parker. I am 67 years old, and for most of my life I worked in a school cafeteria on the east side of Cleveland. I know the smell of hot lunches, the sound of clattering trays, and the rhythm of working hard until my legs ached. Now my days are quieter, spent in a small bungalow with my husband Frank. He has been in a wheelchair since a stroke 10 years ago. I cook his meals, push him outside for air, and sit with him in silence. His hand is often cold, but I hold it anyway. I raised 2 sons under that same roof. Caleb, my oldest, was always the strong one, tall and broad, with a laugh that filled the room. He chose construction work, and for years I believed his body was built to withstand anything. Mason, my younger son, is quieter. He works with his hands as a plumber and electrician, fixing what is broken without fuss. He comes by often, carrying bread from the corner bakery or tightening a loose bolt in the kitchen. When Caleb brought Aubrey home, I tried to welcome her with an open heart. She was polished, well-spoken, and seemed devoted to him. Neighbors told me I was lucky. I believed them. For a while, I felt proud that my son had built a family of his own. I could not have guessed how quickly that picture would crack, or how the very people who smiled at me would one day corner me with demands I never expected. The first time I heard the words kidney transplant, I felt my knees weaken. Caleb had been losing weight, his face drawn and pale. Doctors explained that his kidneys were failing and that time was running short. I sat beside his hospital bed, clutching his hand, whispering that I would do anything to help. I thought that meant sitting with him through dialysis or making sure he ate properly. I did not realize it meant something more. One evening, Aubrey arrived at my house carrying a thick folder of medical reports. She spread the pages across my dining table as if she were teaching a class. She pointed to numbers, circled lines in bright ink, and said clearly, "You are the only compatible match. This is not just an option. It is your duty as his mother." Her voice was calm but sharp, leaving no space for hesitation. Not long after her parents came too, Victor leaned back in my favorite chair, his voice steady. "A mother's sacrifice is the highest act of love. There is no debate." Elaine nodded, her eyes narrowed. "Everyone will know if you refuse. They will say you let your son suffer." I felt their words press against me like heavy stones. I wanted to ask questions, to pause, but the way they stared left me no room. Caleb, too weak to stand, whispered from the couch, "Mom, I trust you. I know you will save me." His hand was cold in mine, and I nodded without speaking. At that moment, it no longer felt like a choice. It felt like an order written in stone. In the days that followed, life moved in a slow, heavy rhythm. I woke early each morning to take vegetables from the small garden behind my house and bring them to the neighborhood market. The coins I earned barely covered groceries, but I could not sit idle. When I came home, I washed clothes, mended torn shirts for neighbors, and fixed simple meals for Frank. His wheelchair creaked every time I pushed him down the narrow hallway, the sound echoing in my ears long after we stopped. Each afternoon I carried food to Caleb's hospital room. I spooned broth into his mouth, brushed the damp hair from his forehead, and told him stories about the neighbors to make him smile. He would squeeze my hand with what strength he had left, whispering that he was grateful, but in his eyes I saw exhaustion deeper than his years. At night, when the house grew quiet, I sat under a dim lamp and sewed by hand. The steady pull of the thread through fabric was supposed to calm me, but lately every stitch carried a question I could not silence. Was I strong enough to go through with the surgery? Was I doing this because I wanted to or because I no longer believed I could say no? I told myself this was what mothers do. We give until there is nothing left. Still, a knot of unease began to form inside me, tightening with each passing day. The first red flag came on a quiet afternoon at the hospital. I walked in with a container of soup, and just as I reached Caleb's bedside, I saw Aubrey drop something into his glass of water. It was quick, almost invisible, but I caught the faint glimmer of a small pill sinking to the bottom. When she noticed me watching, she smiled too quickly. "Just a vitamin," she said, her voice light. But her hands were tight around the cup, and she did not let me touch it. Later that evening, I asked Caleb's doctor, a man with kind eyes and thick glasses, if any new supplements had been prescribed. He flipped through the chart and shook his head. No changes, only the standard regimen. My stomach sank. Why would Aubrey lie? At home, I began noticing more. A white plastic bottle tucked under a napkin on the nightstand, no label, only blue pills inside. The way Aubrey insisted on washing Caleb's dishes herself, checking every plate as if she were hiding something. And the late-night phone calls, her voice low, hurried, drifting through the back porch window. One night I heard her say, "Don't worry. Everything is on track." When I asked who she was talking to, she startled, then laughed nervously. "Just a friend from work," she replied, but her eyes slid away from mine. I told myself I was imagining things, that stress was making me suspicious, yet each detail clung to me like a thorn I could not pull free. Deep down, I knew something was not right. The question was whether I had the courage to face it. Theo, my grandson, was only 9, but he saw more than most adults. He often came to my house after school with his backpack slipping off one shoulder, his hair messy from running. He would sit on the floor with the little toy cars I had bought him at a yard sale, making quiet engine noises as he pushed them across the rug. His laughter usually filled the room like sunlight, but lately he had grown quiet. One afternoon, as I chopped vegetables for dinner, Theo looked up from his game and asked, "Grandma, what if someone makes another person sick on purpose with medicine?" His voice was soft, almost afraid of the words leaving his mouth. My hand froze on the knife. I forced a smile and answered, "Sometimes medicine makes people feel worse before it makes them better." But inside, my heart skipped. Why would a child ask that? Theo shrugged and kept rolling his car, but I noticed the way he gripped it tighter than usual. Before he left, he pulled an old cell phone from his backpack. Its screen was cracked, the corners scratched. "I found this in Mom's drawer," he whispered, then quickly tucked it back. "It has weird things on it. I don't really understand." I wanted to press him, but I didn't. I just hugged him before he ran off. Still, his question lingered in my mind long after he was gone. A child's words had opened a door I had tried to keep closed, and behind it was a truth I was both desperate and terrified to see. My younger son Mason had always been the steady one. He fixed leaky pipes, patched wires, and never spoke more than he needed. But when he looked at me with concern, I knew it was serious. One evening he came by with his toolbox, saying he would check the flickering light in the kitchen. As he worked, he lowered his voice. "Mom, I've seen some things that don't sit right." He pulled out his phone and showed me photos he had taken near the hospital parking lot. The images were blurry but clear enough to make my stomach turn. Aubrey stood by her car, handing a small bag to a man in a black cap and jacket. In the next photo, the man slipped her an envelope. The exchange was quick, but Mason had caught it. "I followed her because I didn't trust how she's been acting," he said. "This isn't normal." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. "Are you sure?" I whispered. Mason nodded, his jaw tight. "I've also seen pill bottles without labels in Caleb's cabinet. She hides them. I don't know what's in them, but I don't like it." I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was mistaken. But the memory of Theo's question, the strange pills, and Aubrey's lies pressed against me. Mason's voice softened. "Mom, please don't rush into surgery until you're sure. Something is wrong here." His words hung heavy in the room. I felt torn between the desperate need to save my son and the growing fear that the truth was darker than I dared admit. A week later, I called the family together in my small living room. The yellow light from a single bulb flickered against the old wallpaper. Frank sat silently in his wheelchair near the window, his eyes half closed but listening. Caleb lay weak on the couch, his face pale. Mason leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching. Aubrey arrived with her parents, Victor and Elaine, who immediately settled into the best chairs as though the house belonged to them. I poured tea to calm my nerves, though my hands shook so badly the cups rattled on their saucers. Aubrey looked at me with expectant eyes, her voice already trembling with false gratitude. "Mom, we just need your final decision. Caleb doesn't have time to wait." Victor leaned forward. "A real mother doesn't hesitate. You must do what's right." Elaine added sharply, "What will the neighbors think if you refuse? That you let your son die?" The words pressed against me like a weight I couldn't lift. Caleb reached for my hand, whispering, "Please, Mom. I know you'll save me." My throat closed, but I nodded. "I'll do it. I'll donate the kidney." The room erupted. Elaine clapped her hands. Aubrey covered her face and pretended to cry. Caleb managed a weak smile. But Mason slammed his palm against the table. The teacups jumped. "No, don't you see? This isn't about saving Caleb, it's about control. Something's wrong." His voice shook with anger. Silence filled the room, everyone staring at him. I couldn't answer. My decision was made, but my heart felt heavier than ever. That night, I sat alone at my desk, writing a simple will, unsure if I would live to see another dawn. The night before the scheduled surgery, the hospital halls felt colder than usual. I had been admitted for final tests, and the smell of disinfectant clung to everything. As the nurse wheeled me down a corridor toward pre-op, I caught sight of something through a glass pane that froze me in place. Aubrey stood near the vending machines with her mother, Elaine. Beside them was the same man Mason had photographed, the black cap pulled low over his face. I watched as Aubrey slipped an envelope into his hand. He tucked it quickly into his jacket, and the three spoke in hushed tones before disappearing into the stairwell. My chest tightened. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but the nurse kept pushing my gurney, unaware of the storm raging inside me. My fingers dug into the thin blanket as though holding on could keep me from falling apart. That night, in the hospital room, I lay awake listening to the hum of machines and the occasional footsteps of staff in the hall. I thought about Caleb, pale and frail in his bed, unaware of the shadows moving around him. I thought of Mason's warning, Theo's frightened question, and the hidden pills. Every piece pointed in the same direction, but I still clung to hope that I was wrong. If I was right, the truth would be unbearable. If I was wrong, my hesitation could cost Caleb his life. I closed my eyes, torn between fear and duty, waiting for morning to come. Morning came, and with it the weight of finality. I was wheeled into the operating room, the harsh white lights glaring down on me. The anesthesiologist prepared a syringe, his voice calm as he explained each step. Dr. Whitfield stood at the head of the table, reviewing charts with a steady hand. Through the observation glass, I saw Aubrey, her arms folded, her gaze sharp, signaling for me to sign quickly. Elaine stood close beside her, whispering encouragements I could not hear. It felt like I was on display, a pawn in a game I barely understood. The nurse placed a clipboard in front of me. My hand trembled as I signed, the ink smudging across the page. I felt as though I had just sealed my own fate. The heart monitor beeped steadily, louder in my ears than ever before. I closed my eyes, whispering a silent prayer. Then the doors banged open. A rush of air swept across the room, rattling the trays of instruments. Gasps filled the space as Theo darted in, clutching the cracked cell phone in his small hands. His sneakers squeaked against the floor as he ran to my side. "Grandma," he cried, his voice trembling yet clear. "I have to tell the truth about why Dad really needs your kidney." Everything stopped. A surgeon froze mid-step. A pair of forceps clattered to the floor. Dr. Whitfield raised a hand and said firmly, "Hold everything. Let the boy speak." Through the glass, Aubrey pounded on the door, her face pale with panic. "Don't listen to him. He's just a child," she screamed. But Theo ignored her. He unlocked the phone and pressed play. The room filled with Aubrey's whisper, cold and unmistakable. "After the transplant, the test results will be perfect. She won't dare refuse." A hush swept over the room. Nurses exchanged glances. Dr. Whitfield's eyes darkened. Theo lifted the phone again. This time a video played, showing Aubrey in the parking lot, passing a bag to the man in the black cap. Elaine's voice was clear. "With the post-op data, we can sell it overseas." The truth struck like thunder. Dr. Whitfield's voice cut through the silence. "Stop all preparations. This surgery is over. Call security now." Chaos followed, but it was not the chaos of surgery. Nurses stepped back from the table, their hands still gloved, their faces pale with shock. The anesthesiologist set down his syringe, shaking his head. Dr. Whitfield stood tall, his voice sharp. "This is no longer a procedure. This is an investigation." He ordered security to seal the room and collect the evidence Theo had brought. Aubrey's screams echoed through the glass as 2 guards restrained her outside. Elaine clutched her daughter's arm, her face drained of color, while Victor whispered frantically to anyone who would listen. But no one moved to help them. The authority in Dr. Whitfield's tone had shifted the air. This was no longer their stage. I was wheeled to a recovery bay, not for surgery but for safety. Mason rushed in minutes later, his shirt damp with sweat, his eyes blazing. He took my hand firmly. "It's over, Mom. You don't have to give them anything." His voice cracked, but his grip was strong. Down the hall, I could hear Caleb's confused voice, weak but rising. "What's happening? Why are they yelling?" My heart broke knowing he had trusted a woman who had betrayed him so deeply. Yet I also felt a flood of relief. The operation had been stopped before I lost more than I already had. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe, even as tears blurred my vision. The truth was heavy, but at least it was finally out in the open. The days after the operating room confrontation felt like walking through the ruins of a storm. Police arrived at the hospital, collecting the phone and video Theo had brought, interviewing staff, and securing the strange bottles Mason had photographed. News spread quickly. Reports spoke of a trafficking scheme in which Aubrey and her parents were working with outsiders to push experimental drugs overseas. The kidney transplant was never about saving Caleb. It was about using his surgery as a cover to gather data and profit from his suffering. Caleb was devastated when he learned the truth. He lay in his hospital bed, tears sliding down his thin cheeks. "Mom, I didn't see it. I trusted her." His voice was weak, filled with shame. I held his hand and whispered, "What matters is that you are still here. We will fight this together." Slowly, with dialysis and new treatment, he began to recover. Mason became my steady rock, visiting every day, making sure I ate, making sure I rested. Theo, my little hero, carried himself with quiet pride. He had spoken up when adults were too afraid. Even Frank, who had been so silent for years, managed to squeeze my hand one evening as if to tell me he understood. In the quiet of my home, I sat down with my old diary and wrote, "Blood is not the only proof of family. Truth, courage, and love are stronger bonds. I nearly gave up everything, but the bravery of a child reminded me that silence protects no one." If you are listening, and if this story reaches you, remember, ask questions, trust your instincts, and never let fear decide for you. And if this message touched you, share it, like it, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Together, we keep the light alive. My name is Lois Carrington. I am 62 years old, and 3 nights before Christmas I heard the words no mother should ever hear. I was folding towels in the laundry room, the dryer humming, steam curling into the air when the door left slightly ajar betrayed the truth. My son Daniel, the boy I carried for 28 hours of labor, the man I once called my pride, lowered his voice and said to his wife, "Rebecca, the best Christmas gift would be if she just died." I froze, the red towel in my hand suddenly heavy as stone. I waited for laughter, for some sign of a joke. None came. Instead, Rebecca's voice drifted back, calm and ordinary. "You said it, not me." The silence afterward pressed harder than the words themselves. I stumbled upstairs to the in-law suite where they allowed me to stay, the one room I was never permitted to decorate, the room without locks. My knees shook, but I forced myself to sit on the edge of the bed. The truth echoed, over and over. My only child wished me gone, as if my death were a relief. For years I had been the quiet support, the babysitter, the bill payer, the woman who had sold her own home to help Daniel and Rebecca buy theirs. I believed love would be enough. That night, staring at the faded walls and the untouched suitcases in my closet, I realized love had become a one-way current. If you are listening, imagine for a moment hearing your own child wish you away. What would you do? Would you scream? Would you collapse? Or would you gather the pieces of yourself and prepare to act? That night, I reached for my notebook, wrote down Daniel's words, and promised myself I would never forget them. They would become the beginning of my answer. I sat in that small room, the one they called generous, though it held no sign of me, no piece of my history. My chest ached but no tears came. Instead, there was a hollow silence inside, a quiet so sharp it hurt. I thought of the years that had led me here, every sacrifice woven into the fabric of this family. When Daniel lost his job, I canceled my cruise and gave him the money I had saved. When Rebecca wanted a bigger house, I sold the home my late husband and I built together and handed over $120,000 to make their dream possible. I had told myself I was investing in my son's future, but really I was erasing my own. The memories came in flashes, the late nights rocking my grandchildren to sleep when Rebecca wanted me time. The grocery bags I carried in week after week, filling their pantry without being asked. The bills I slipped money toward when they were just short this month. I had convinced myself it was love, but love without gratitude slowly drains the giver dry. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the closet. Inside were the suitcases I had not touched in 3 years, still tagged from trips never taken. The smallest one still carried the label from that canceled cruise. My life had been on hold, waiting for Daniel and Rebecca to appreciate me. I leaned back against the wall, notebook in my lap, Daniel's words written in dark ink across the page. I traced them with my finger, the way I used to trace his hairline when he was a child asleep on my chest. How could the same boy who once cried for me in the night now wish me gone? Silence filled the room. Not peace, not rest. It was the silence of being invisible, of being seen only as an obstacle. The ache did not roar. It whispered, steady and cruel, "You are not wanted here." And in that whisper, a seed of resolve began to take root. The next morning, I forced myself into routine. I folded laundry, brewed coffee, smiled faintly at my grandchildren, and nodded through Rebecca's clipped instructions about the day. On the surface, everything looked the same. But inside, I carried the weight of those words, a secret bruise no one could see. After breakfast, I went back upstairs to the in-law suite. My hands trembled as I opened the desk drawer where I kept old mail. The top envelope bore the mortgage company's logo. I tore it open carefully, almost hoping it was nothing. 3 months past due. My breath caught. The house that had cost me my savings, the one Daniel promised would always be part mine, was teetering on the edge. I opened my laptop, something I rarely did. Numbers appeared like small betrayals across the screen. The joint account I had set up for emergencies was nearly empty. Quiet withdrawals, week after week. Thousands gone. I had stopped checking years ago, trusting Daniel's word when he said they only used it sparingly. Now I saw the truth. It was not an emergency fund. It had become their private allowance. I leaned back in the chair, sick to my stomach. My savings had not been gifts of love. They had been lifelines taken without gratitude. How many times had I filled the fridge thinking it was kindness, when it was really just covering their overspending? Voices carried up from downstairs. I moved to the stairwell and listened. Daniel's voice was low, tense. "That emergency account is empty. Completely drained." Rebecca answered, casual. "What about her other one? The one she uses for Christmas gifts?" Daniel snapped back. "I'm not robbing my mother." But there was no conviction in his tone, no outrage at her suggestion. Just a pause, followed by, "I'll figure something out." I stepped back, pressing a hand to the wall. The betrayal was no longer just whispered wishes. It was numbers on a screen, overdue bills, and secret conversations about what else they might take. Back in my room, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were documents I had nearly forgotten: the co-ownership deed, notarized agreements, letters from the lawyer my husband and I once trusted. I ran my hand over the neat signature, my own name still printed clearly. Daniel had promised to remove me, but he had never filed the papers. I whispered aloud, almost in disbelief, "My name is still here." It was as if a hidden door had opened. Beneath the ache, something stronger stirred. Proof, leverage, a reminder that I was not powerless, not yet. That evening, after the house had grown quiet, I sat at my desk with the folder spread out before me. The papers smelled faintly of dust, untouched for years, yet every line carried a memory. My late husband Richard had insisted we keep copies of everything. Lois, he would say, "Trust people with your heart, not your money." At the time, I thought it cynical. Now I saw it as foresight. I pulled out an envelope labeled in Richard's handwriting, Plan B. Inside were the documents he had once walked me through: co-ownership deed, letters from our lawyer, even a separate list of account numbers Richard urged me to keep away from Daniel. I remember rolling my eyes back then, insisting family could be trusted. Tonight, staring at Daniel's casual betrayal, I felt only gratitude for Richard's caution. With steady hands, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. "Sophia Miller," answered a familiar voice. Relief washed over me. Sophia had been our attorney for decades, a woman who knew our history. "Sophia," I said, my voice thin, "I need to know if the paperwork we filed on the house is still valid, the one with my name on the deed." She paused only a moment. "Of course it is. Daniel never filed the removal. You never signed anything. You still own 40%. I closed my eyes. For the first time in days, my heart slowed, so I still have rights. "You do," she replied gently. "Tell me what happened." And I did. The overheard words, the drained accounts, the overdue mortgage, the pressure to consolidate finances under Daniel's control. When I finished, silence hung on the line until Sophia spoke firmly. "Lois, you are not trapped. You have power here. If you want out, we can act." "I don't want revenge," I whispered. "I want out, but on my terms." "Then we draft a notice of intent to sell. It will land hard. Are you ready for that?" I looked around the small room, at the faded curtains Rebecca never let me replace, at the bed where I had swallowed disappointment night after night. My hand rested on the suitcase still waiting in the closet. "Yes," I said, "I am ready." Sophia promised to prepare the papers by morning. After I hung up, I opened my suitcase and began to pack. Not frantically, not in fear, but with careful resolve. I folded each sweater as if tucking away an old version of myself. I set aside only essentials: clothes, my passport, Richard's watch. Finally, I placed the envelope labeled Plan B on top. It was more than documents. It was proof that even after years of giving, of being drained and dismissed, I still had something left that was mine. That night, as snow drifted outside the window, I whispered into the silence, "You wished me gone, Daniel. You will get your wish, but not the way you think." The next day was Christmas Eve. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon candles and the artificial pine of the tree in the living room. But beneath the festive veneer, cracks were already spreading. By mid-morning, Sophia had sent the official notice of intent to sell, addressed to both Daniel and Rebecca. It arrived in their inboxes like a spark dropped into dry straw. I could almost hear the chaos ignite from upstairs. Around noon, the first tremor hit. The lights flickered, then went dark. The television shut off mid-commercial, the dishwasher ground to silence, and the hum of the refrigerator faded. Daniel stormed into the kitchen, phone in hand, cursing under his breath. Rebecca followed, her voice shrill. "What do you mean the power is cut? We have guests coming tonight. My mother is flying in tomorrow." Daniel's answer was muffled, but I caught enough. The bill wasn't paid. I thought, Mom, he stopped himself, glancing toward the stairs, toward me. I stayed in my room, listening. Rebecca's voice cracked. "You said she would cover it like always." Their argument rolled on, voices rising and falling, each blaming the other. Downstairs, the Christmas tree stood in darkness, its ornaments glinting faintly in the dim afternoon light. Meanwhile, I opened my small suitcase and placed a tin of cookies inside. Then I thought of the children. They had done nothing to deserve this. Quietly, I wrapped 3 small gifts in plain brown paper, one for each grandchild, and wrote their names in thick marker. Inside each package, I placed a short letter. I wrote of love, of baking pies together, of bedtime stories, of the way their laughter had once filled my life with hope. I ended each letter the same way: "None of this is your fault. Remember that." By the time I sealed the last envelope, the house below had grown louder. Rebecca slammed cabinet doors. Daniel barked into the phone at the utility company. Panic was replacing denial. I sat at my desk, listening to the storm unravel. That evening, Rebecca stomped upstairs, her perfume heavy, her eyes wild. She pushed into my room without knocking. "Did you cancel something?" she demanded. "The mortgage, the power, why is everything collapsing right now?" I looked at her calmly. "Because you built your life on a foundation I paid for, and I am done paying." She stared at me, stunned into silence. Then she turned, muttering, and slammed the door behind her. I exhaled slowly, my hands steady. The fallout had begun, and while they scrambled in the dark, I felt only clarity. For the first time in years, I was no longer the one unraveling. They were. The house was still dark when I rose before dawn. Snow dusted the windowsills, and the air inside was colder than usual. I dressed quietly, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and set it by the door. Each zipper, each fold of clothing felt like a line drawn, an ending written in fabric and resolve. Downstairs, the tree loomed in the corner, ornaments glinting faintly in the gray light. I knelt and placed the 3 simple gifts beneath its branches. No ribbons, no glittering boughs, just brown paper and words of love sealed inside. It was all I could give my grandchildren now, and perhaps all they truly needed, proof that their grandmother loved them without condition. The airport shuttle pulled into the driveway at exactly 4 a.m. I wheeled my suitcase to the door, pausing for a long breath. Behind me lay years of silence, of being treated as invisible, of waiting for gratitude that never came. Ahead lay only uncertainty, yet for the first time I felt steady. I stepped outside, the cold biting my cheeks, the snow crunching beneath my shoes. As the driver loaded my bag, I glanced back at the house. No light glowed from within. No warmth spilled onto the porch. It stood dark and silent, like the hollow shell of promises never kept. On the ride to the airport, I leaned against the window and watched the world blur past. Christmas lights still twinkled on neighborhood lawns, though none shone in mine. Families would gather, children would laugh, but my chapter in that house was closed. When the plane lifted off hours later, I pressed my forehead to the window. Below, the land spread out in neat squares of snow and trees. I did not cry. Not when the seatbelt sign dinged. Not when the captain announced our arrival. Not when I heard French voices filling the cabin as we landed in Paris. I had not run away. I had not surrendered. I had walked toward myself, and for the first time in years that felt like enough. Back in the States, the notice from Sophia landed harder than I had imagined. By the time my plane touched down in Paris, Daniel and Rebecca had already received the email confirming my intent to sell. The silence on my phone did not last long. Missed calls stacked one after another, messages poured in, some pleading, some angry. I let them ring, untouched. It was 2 days later when I finally answered. Daniel's voice cracked through the line. "Mom, what are you doing? You can't just..." "I gave you exactly what you asked for," I said calmly. I disappeared. There was a pause, a shuffle, then Rebecca's voice in the background, sharp and panicked. "Tell her we can't lose the house. Not now." Daniel's words tumbled out. "We're drowning. The mortgage, the bills, we can't do this without you." My grip on the phone tightened, but my voice remained steady. "You stopped treating me like family the night you wished me dead. Since then, I've been nothing but a wallet and a babysitter." "We didn't mean it like that," Daniel whispered. "Yes, you did. Maybe not in those exact words every day, but in how you treated me. and now you will live with it." The line went quiet except for his breathing. I closed my eyes and added, "This house was never just yours. You forgot that, and now the papers will remind you." When I hung up, my hands trembled not from fear but from release. The reckoning had come, not with shouts or revenge, but with truth laid bare. Paris in winter was cold, but the air felt lighter than it had in years. One evening I sat alone in a small cafe near the Seine, a notebook open in front of me. I wrote the words slowly, letting them sink into the page. I didn't just walk away. I walked toward myself. For so long I believed love meant giving until nothing remained. I thought being a good mother meant covering debts, filling pantries, silencing my own needs. But love without respect is not love. It is servitude, and family that treats you like a burden is not family, no matter what name they carry. I closed the notebook, sipped my tea, and looked out at the glowing city. I missed my grandchildren, yes, but I had left them something no darkness could take, a reminder that they were loved, and that love does not mean erasing yourself. To anyone listening, hear this: you have the right to draw a line, you have the right to keep your dignity. And sometimes the bravest act is not staying but leaving. If this story has touched you, I invite you to share it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Because stories of strength, of survival, and of quiet justice deserve to be heard across every corner of the world.